In their waning days of power, they have their priorities straight, so they'll finally support the president's agenda and the rule of law, right?
We like Elf. I think Elf is probably my favorite is It's a Wonderful Life. It's one of my favorite movies of all time. I love It's a Wonderful Life. I watch it every Christmas. It's a thing I do. It's a thing I make my kids do. It's black and white. I think they're very confused about that.
They're not the only ones confused. The cold, hard facts are this. Many Republicans have no desire at all to build a wall. They don't want to fund it, and they don't want it, or anything else that actually matters to the voters who elected them. Now, while they're still being paid to do the people's work, I think they've clearly moved on to merrymaking, frivolity, talking about old family movies and family favorites. Well, the administration, however, is doing its best to light a fire under Congress.
We're going to do whatever is necessary to build the border wall to stop this ongoing crisis of illegal immigration.
And that means
this is a very, if it comes to it, absolutely.
But so what if they only have a few legislative days left in the majority? As today's New York Times reports, the Republicans are not feeling the urgency at all. Quote, vanquished and retiring members are sick and tired of Washington and don't want to show up anymore to vote. Many lawmakers, relegated to cubicles as incoming members take their offices, have been skipping votes in the weeks since the House Republicans were swept from power in the midterm elections. And Republican leaders are unsure whether they will ever return. Oh, really? Then we as taxpayers should be unsure whether they're ever going to receive their last paychecks, or maybe a chunk of their fat pensions for that matter. This is a complete dereliction of duty when we have an ongoing emergency on our southern border. Now, they're worrying about working out of a cubicle? But let's not kid ourselves, my friends. The leadership of both parties, again, never wanted to fund the wall. Speaker Paul Ryan is a nice person, but he was always against it. Remember what he said back in October?
We intend on having a full-fledged discussion about how to complete this mission of securing our border, and we will have a big fight about that. And we're going to be looking at doing we'll figure out how to do it in December.
Oh my gosh, a full-fledged discussion? A fight? Well, we've had neither. And as I predicted in October, it's all talk, push it to right before Christmas, they'll do nothing. Now, does Ryan really think we're all that stupid? And anyway, what's there to discuss? Secure the border. That's what we want. We have people pouring across our border, children dying from the trek because adults, they know that if they have a child with them, they're going to be processed and then they'll be released into the country. That's just the way it works. Well, the truth is, Republican leadership, for the most part, with few exceptions, again, never wanted a wall. They just want the appearance of border fortification.
You need cameras, you need electronic devices, you need these you need the aerial devices to be able to police it. In the mountainous areas, you can't build a wall over a mountain, so you need cameras and you need drones up there.
Deep thoughts. You can't build a wall over a mountain. Okay, anyone and anytime they start talking about sensors and drones, they're closer to the Schumer position than the Trump position. This is why I repeatedly urge the Republicans to elect a new speaker back when Ryan announced his retirement. They needed a strong leader who would help enact the president's agenda, not someone more focused on, well, his long goodbye.
I remember just being awestruck the first time I walked down that center aisle. That feeling just never goes away. I still feel it when I walk onto the floor each and every time. Since becoming Speaker of the House, which is not something that we're used to in Wisconsin, I'm the only one who's done that. I appreciate the indulgence of the people I work for who indulged the fact that I had other responsibilities in addition.
Okay, well, that's sweet. That was a nice little farewell address, but we shouldn't have to indulge anyone working for us. Paul Ryan is a really kind person, and he's a nice man, and he's smart. And he always called the taxpayers his employers. I like that. So shouldn't we expect, and we the people expect, our employees to work through their last day on the job? If we're in charge, we say work, right? Well, given the lack of initiative in the House and absolutely no direction being given by leadership, you might wonder how the retiring speaker is spending his time. Well, Yes, to put on a pair of fuzzy jammies and watch Paul Ryan, the series.
A few days after he was sworn into office, I needed to know, what is it that you want to do? The first thing he said was tax reform.
Our tax system is punishing all those qualities that make America great.
It was political suicide.
It was good work. It's what needed to be done. It's just that most members were really uncomfortable about it.
I remember the difficulty Paul was having in making that decision.
We mapped out a calendar and we saw very quickly, you can't lose a week. We're going to run out of time. It's going to push everything back and we're going to run out of time.
Oh, that's good. Fire up the popcorn maker, kids. Come see how Paul Ryan did it. Oh, I love how they're worrying about running out of time in that little documentary. We're running out of time. Well, we are running out of time for America. Now, this is my last week on terrestrial radio, and I'm watching a new podcast in January. A lot of you have already heard about it. But my listeners today had this to say about the Republicans' refusal to do what's right at the border.
Purposefully incompetent, maliciously incompetent.
Political opportunist.
Infantile.
Call your congressmen, people out there listening. Call them, tell them no matter what to back our president.
And those are the nice things they said. Well, you may have to call your congressman, but there are reports that the Republicans are considering a continuing resolution scam where they would fund the government until September with no real money for the wall. Now, the people in the White House cannot allow this. They should not stand for this. Bring on the shutdown. For all the bluster and the worry about a government shutdown, we all should realize one thing. With the exception of tax reform, which frankly could have been a lot better, and VA reform, which was good and needed, the government has essentially been shut down. Shut down to the will of the American people for 2 years. Does that sound harsh? Well, I'm telling you the way it is, not the way you want it to be. The Republicans were elected to Congress to move the Trump agenda, and in many cases, they have frustrated it. That is a fact. They passed a massive defense spending bill without any offsetting cuts. So much for spending caps. They secured no asylum reform. They did not end chain migration. They failed to produce an infrastructure bill, and they blocked the president's efforts to fully fund his signature promise. And the reason why many of them got into office in the first place, well, it was supposed to be to build the border wall. Republicans are spending time in political capital this week on criminal justice reform, which I generally support. But this was not the reason the American people turned out to vote in 2016. It's also not an emergency, whereas the disaster at the border really is. So whether they're retiring or returning in the new year, Republicans should stay focused and in session through Christmas if necessary to get this wall funded. I know what you're saying. It'll never happen, Laura. It'll never happen. Well, guess what? This is our country. This is what they promised to do implicitly when President Trump was elected. And by the way, this goes for the White House as well. For the retirees, the holidays will be here soon enough. And they're going to have plenty of time to join Paul Ryan. They can binge watch things like It's a Wonderful Life. And even as our political life becomes anything but. And that's the angle. All right, joining me now with reaction is Matt Schlatt, chair of the American Conservative Union, and Luis Miranda, former DNC communications director. Matt, should the president veto any bill that does not give him adequate funding for this wall?
Absolutely. There's nothing wrong with the Republican Party finally making it clear to the Democrats that there's not a white flag every time we have a spending fight. And that's essentially what we have learned over the years, is that we lose these budget fights. Shutdowns are bad for our party, so we're just going to not fight anymore. And I think that is one of the biggest mistakes that my party has learned. And I'd like the president to stand up and realize that if we don't get it on a funding measure, no other measures pass.
Well, I would say, Manuel, here's what happened. The president in, I guess it was April, Matt, correct me if I'm wrong, that he wouldn't do another omnibus.
That's right.
His instinct was right. His political instinct is so much better.
He almost didn't sign it.
He almost remember that morning. It
Yes.
was, and I was like, oh, thank God. His instincts are so good politically. But the Republican leadership, I'm sorry, and I like Paul Ryan. It pains me to say this. I've always liked him very much as a person. I think he's a good person. Yeah. But he's not where the president is on this issue. I know you're not either, but as a matter for the country, We have thousands and thousands of people pouring across our border month after month after month. This is inhumane. It is environmentally a disaster for both Mexico and the United States. And it is a national security issue. That's all, and an economic issue. And we're sitting around saying, oh, well, we're going to do another continuing resolution. That is an abdication of leadership for the Republicans and the Democrats. And I'm telling you, people are not going to put up with this. Ultimately, they're not.
Well, one of the problems is the president lost when he said that Mexico was going to pay for this wall. And so he has no leverage when he's now trying to make taxpayers foot the bill for a wall that he said all along Mexico would pay.
You know how much the taxpayers pay every year for illegal immigrant health care? $18 billion. Put that in your pipe and smoke it. $18 billion just for the medical care for illegal immigrants. Who do you think who's paying that?
Well, you know
who's paying for that?
You know what
Mexico?
else?
No, we're paying
you know
for
what
it.
else
You and I
immigrants
and you and I.
Immigrants are
Everyone
also
in this room is
doing a lot for our economy in the fields. You saw what happened in Georgia.
Are we going to that old trope in the fields?
But it's true.
Yeah. Well,
our crops rot on the vine.
Okay, so 5% of the workforce.
You said something important.
5% of the workforce. Everyone listening, I love you and I'm glad you're on the show, but 5% of the illegal immigrant workforce is in the fields. We could do a guest worker program and make that could be an easy fix. We could all sit around this table and fix that one.
Let's do it.
But don't make that argument about the strawberries in the fields. We got people in this country who need wages that go up, not down or flatlining, both legal immigrants who paid the price and American citizens.
We had a bill in 2013 to do that kind of thing, to make E-Verify across the board, and Republicans blocked it.
That's not true.
No,
as you know,
that's
the Democrats are very opposed to E-Verify, and I think actually if you look at
E-Verify was part of the gang of
if you look at that was just a Senate bill. If you look at just part of what's going on with this whole question of immigration, it doesn't matter what your politics are. You can't look at our southern border and not feel like this is travesty of American principles and the rule of law to not solve the problem.
Let me put up a graphic. I want you both to react to this because, again, I don't think this is a Republican. I just hit the Republicans for the first 8 minutes of the show. Probably get lousy ratings, but guess what? That's the truth. People need to hear the truth of what's happening on right 300 yards from where we're broadcasting. Legal border crossings in November. We'll check it out. Look, put the full screen up, please. According to the CPB, 51,856 people were apprehended illegally crossing the border with Mexico in November. Those numbers were statistically identical to October 51,000. Among the last 6 years, only fiscal year 2017, though, has produced higher illegal immigration numbers in October and November. They're astronomically high. The number of children being brought across the border is also at an all-time high.
Laura,
at an all-time high.
Where I agree with you is that there's definitely things we can be doing in any number of fronts to improve the legal immigration system, to improve how we handle security at the border, to improve an asylum process.
Do you believe in a border?
That gives people options along the way.
Do you believe in a border?
Absolutely.
What do you want the border to look
like? And during the Obama administration, we did plenty to make sure that we had a safe and orderly and secure border.
We had a crisis which knocked Eric Cantor out of town,
and
okay?
Then we were making sure that we were stopping
crossing the border at record numbers in 2014.
And money and weapons south. We were
We had Fast and
I heard about the weapons.
Fast and Furious where the weapons were going south.
Look,
Brian Terry ended up dead. What are you talking about?
You say this isn't a partisan issue, but Laura, we have to also be honest that it seems to be in the interests of the Democrats who are running they're going to be running the congressional majority in the House and in the Senate, that they believe that unfettered, an open border, a non-border, in the south of our country is a good thing for them politically. Let's face it.
No Democrat in Congress has stated that.
Don't let the Republicans off the hook, though.
I agree, but
they had Congress for the last 2 years. They should have done this the first 30 days in Congress. They shouldn't have futzed around with all this other stuff.
But their leadership
the border.
want to build the wall.
Use it as an issue to rile up the base, and that's the problem. That it becomes an issue.
I'm hitting the Republican Party. I'm not rounding up the base. Base has already spoken.
I'm talking about what the parties, both of them in Congress, frankly. This is a good opportunity to rile up their base on the respective issues when we should be working at real solutions. Because here's the truth. Right now, there's a crisis where 4,000 people are streaming across the border from Venezuela or Colombia, and they're handling it just fine. And you know how they're doing it? They're using it. They're using it with U.S. money.
Are you kidding me?
Laura, they're using U.S. money. So the United States government is actually helping them with that. So you tell me that
I happen to have a lot of friends in Colombia who I talk to regularly.
It's
a nightmare.
The Central Americans that are coming across and help set up systems along the way to make sure that this is not a crisis.
You can talk over me, but the facts. Colombia is getting crushed under the weight of the exodus from Venezuela.
The United States is giving Colombia money to deal with that, and they're handling.
Oh my God!
And you're telling me that we can't.
That's hilarious. Why don't we bring all 2 million?
Why don't we use that money? Why can't?
Jeez, why is America first, baby?
We cannot do this.
But hold on a second.
Why
Let me get in here.
Let me get in here. Hold on. So you're in favor. You're in favor of enforcing other countries' borders, but not America. Bingo.
That is not what I said, Laura. The point that I'm making is that we can be working with the Northern Triangle in a responsible way to make sure that we are treating the process in a way where we deny the smugglers, we deny the human traffickers, more clients.
Let me get in here.
But we also process the asylum requests properly.
All right, real quick.
Just very quickly, Donald Trump is going to have to find some way to fund this wall.
He better get it done. He's going to lose in 2020. He doesn't get this done.
He is working with his lawyers to make sure he funds this wall without Congress.
He better.
Donald Trump's got to stand. Mexico, and that's where he lost his battle.
That's not why he lost.
That's where he lost.
Mexico is going to do a lot better with a new NAFTA, and that will, but we could tax remittance. You in favor of taxing remittances to Mexico? 25% illegal, sending money back home. All right, you're not in favor of that. All right, Matt Luis, I appreciate it. Today, former FBI Director Jim Comey emerged from his latest closed-door hearing on Capitol Hill to diss a Fox News reporter, attack this network, and all of you at the same time. Watch.
At some point, someone has to stand up, and in the face of fear of Fox News, fear of their base, fear of mean tweets, stand up for the values of this country.
Yeah, I have a question from Fox News, in fact. Your handling of the Flynn interview, how is it consistent with the investigation's roadmap for agents, the Domestic Investigations Operations Guide?
It's entirely consistent in my view.
Director Comey, the FBI's reputation has taken a big hit over the last year. Do you share any of the responsibility for that?
No. The FBI's reputation has taken a big hit because the President of the United States, with his acolytes, has lied about it constantly. And in the face of those lies, a whole lot of good people who watch your network believe that nonsense. That's a tragedy.
You dumb people, the good people, believe that nonsense. Despite his vertical stature, he came across as incredibly small, addressing our own Catherine Herridge that way. Here to react, Hoover Institute senior fellow Victor Davis Hanson, VDH. What does that exchange tell us about Mr. Comey?
You know, I used to think he was a tragic figure, but he's becoming a comic figure. We know that he misled the Congress 245 times. I don't remember. I don't know if you and I did that or your viewers did that with IRS agents, we'd be in jail. He bragged on television or in an interview that he was able to step around the special counsel and get Michael Flynn to have an interview without an attorney, and then there was sort of a perjury trap. And this all comes on top. Remember, Laura, that in the email, the Hillary Clinton email investigations, the Inspector General said he conflated being an investigator and a prosecutor. He changed language of gross negligence so that Hillary Clinton would not be subject to criminal exposure. He wrote the conclusion before he'd even interviewed her. He took out the word investigation on the prompt of Loretta Lynn. We go to the FISA warrants. There he is again. He didn't tell the FISA judge that the dossier was a product of Hillary Clinton's opposition research. He didn't.
But how about the condescending stuff, Victor? How about the little condescending? He has such a condescending air about him. Well, you're good viewers.
Yeah, I think that's
nonsense. Oh, just dismissive.
No,
get out. I find him so tedious.
I
can't believe his FBI director.
No, I think he's a comic figure. That's why I said, because he quotes Reinhold Niebuhr when he tweets. He's a professor of ethical leadership. Yeah. He wrote a book called The Higher Truth. And instead of all this, as I said, instead of all this self-righteousness, we want self-introspection to see if he can square that circle of posing as this moral arbiter of everybody else's ethics. And yet he has been the most unethical FBI director in the history of the agency and has done more harm by not telling the truth and warping these investigations for political purposes by his own admission in some cases. When he said, I sort of massaged things because I knew that Hillary Clinton would be the likely winner of the presidential election. So there's this disconnect between Comey, the moralist, and the amoral behavior.
You know what's hilarious,
FBI. 12 FBI agents have been reassigned or fired or retired under his
these
tenure.
Other cables today. I flip around when I'm getting and working on the angle. I flip it around, and they hang on his every word. I mean, Wolf Blitzer and those girls, it's like every time Comey comes out, it's like you know, the Bobby Soxers in Sinatra. It's like, oh, Comey comes out. Oh my God, you've been following your the news on this subject over the last several months or last year. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, even his deputy, Andrew McCabe, says that he didn't leak. Comey says, yes, you did. And he said, no, you leaked. And then we were told that McCabe says the dossier was really important. Comey says, no, the dossier was not important. And it's just this constant conflict of truth and by the author of A Higher Loyalty that really bothers Americans. And I think he should just stop the obsession with Donald Trump and really read Reinhard Niebuhr and then self-reflect and get rid of the sanctimoniousness.
VDH is coming on radio with me, though, this week. All right, Victor, thanks so much. Nancy Pelosi says we have a moral responsibility to take care of migrant children. Fair enough. And we do once they're here. But where's she been when all those American children were being harmed by illegals? Up next.
Welcome back to Hannity. Congress faces a midnight Friday deadline to avoid a partial government shutdown. Joining us now for the latest is Garrett Tenney. Garrett?
Well, Judge, tonight the White House is suggesting it may be able to strike a deal with Democrats to keep the government open. A number of plans are being discussed, and at this point there's still no specific proposal. But as these negotiations continue, it's starting to look like the White House may be softening its hard line on $5 billion for the border wall. A source with knowledge of the negotiations tells Fox News that one proposal is for a continuing resolution, which would keep the government funded through next year and provide $1.6 billion for border security and about 65 miles of fencing through the Rio Grande section of the southern border. Democratic leaders have already said that they'd be open to such a proposal, but the $1.6 billion is still far less than the $5 billion the president's looking for. Earlier today, he stressed the need for a physical wall, tweeting, anytime you hear a Democrat saying that you can have good border security without a wall, write them off as just another politician following the party line. Time for us to save billions of dollars a year and have at the same time far greater safety and control. To get the president's wall, sources tell our own John Roberts, the White House may seek a legal opinion to see if it can use money from the Department of Defense's budget to start building portions of the wall. Again, though, we're told this is just one of many proposals being discussed and worked out, but it is another indication that if the president wants a deal this week to avoid a shutdown, it's likely going to be for far less than the $5 billion that he wants. If a shutdown does drag on into the new year, several senior Republicans also today pointed out to us that negotiations will likely only get tougher once Democrats take control of the House. Judge?
All right, Garrett, thanks so much. And joining us now with reaction is syndicated columnist and author Michelle Malkin, along with GoPac chairman David Avella. Good evening. Michelle, I'm going to start with you. You know, the president has made it clear that he has no problem taking responsibility for a partial shutdown so that he can get the border wall that he has promised. Now, it seems, just as we heard from Garrett Tenney and everything that's been happening, that he probably won't get more than the $1.6 billion. How does that happen with a Republican-controlled House and Senate?
Well, for those of us who've watched feckless Republicans in the Beltway capitulate over and over again, this is no surprise. And on both sides of the aisle, what you're seeing with this border disorder and this continued foot dragging and kicking the can down the road, this is the dictionary definition, Judge, of border beltway politics as usual. This is the swamp way. And I got to tell you, my readers who followed my immigration reporting over the last 25 years of it are completely sick of it. And they do hope that President Trump is true to his word, because if they don't build the wall, you will fall. And that goes for people on both sides of the aisle. $1.6 billion, this is laughable. It is a measly, measly down payment on one of the most fundamental duties of this government, to protect the states against invasion.
All right. And David, you know, I mean, you're in charge of GoPac. You work with politicians across the country. Why are Republicans not in sync with the president on this?
Well, somewhat more funding than what the president is asking for. What we have to keep in mind here, though, is by not funding border security now, we're going to be paying a bigger price in the future, as more money is going to have to go into fighting illegal drugs that come into this country, more of the weapons that criminals will bring into this country. I mean, we heard last week from the Department of Homeland Security how they stopped 3,700 known or suspected terrorists at the border in 2017. They stopped 17,000 criminals at the border. They stopped over 1,000 gang members. So we can pay the price now, or we can pay the price down the line in this. Now, here is the good news. Let's say they don't get something done. If the New Deal that the president has been able to put together with Mexico does have the economic activity that we think it will, that projections suggest it will, then there'll be new revenue coming in that will give the president actually a stronger hand to say, look, we now have the money coming in that now we should be funding border security. And the last point I want to make is how far Nancy Pelosi has come, that during Barack Obama's administration, she wanted to pass bills and then find out what was in them. And now all of a sudden she has to know everything that's in a bill before she'll pass it.
And Michelle, what about the idea of using the Department of Defense budget?
Yeah, I'm in the camp of by any means necessary, and it is certainly true that according to the constitutional mandate in Article 4, Section 4, this is a national security crisis. I mean, we had these migrant invasions, and we've talked about this, Judge, that are coordinated globally. This is sabotage of our sovereignty by, I think, menaces inside and outside of our country. And if this doesn't constitute a presidential prerogative for using our defense budget on the border, I don't know what does. And let's talk about more Democrat hypocrisy, because every Senate Democrat in 2013 voted for $46 billion of border security, including reinforced steel barriers. And Senate Democrats at the time in 2006, including Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden, Chuck Schumer, who now claims that we don't need physical barriers in order to ensure border security, all voted for the Secure Fence Act, which included 30 feet steel bollard fences and walls. Right. The idea that we don't need physical barriers at a time when countries around the world can't erect them fast enough, it's laughable, and they need to be called out.
All right. And David Avella, just quickly, how much do you think the most the president's going to get?
Hopefully he's going to get $5 billion, but it may not come till 2019.
All right. Thanks, guys. And up next, we might be headed for yet another Supreme Court showdown over Obamacare. We'll explain as Hannity continues. Welcome back to Hannity. Late last week, a federal judge in Texas ruled Obamacare is unconstitutional. Now the case is likely to head to the Supreme Court. And many are wondering what Chief Justice Roberts and newly appointed Justice Kavanaugh will do. Today, President Trump offered to work with Democrats on a great replacement if Obamacare is scrapped. The Democrats are already freaking out. Here's what Senator Chuck Schumer said yesterday.
It's an awful ruling. It goes, of course, it undoes pre-existing conditions. It jeopardizes the tens of millions who are getting good health care in the exchange, but it goes way beyond that. It would knock out funding for treatment of opioids. It would raise drug prices and close the donut hole so seniors would pay more for drug prices. It would eliminate a lot of maternal care, all kinds of women's health. It's an awful, awful ruling. We're going to fight this tooth and nail.
Meanwhile, Democrats are vocal about what they've really wanted all along, Medicare for all.
Former Attorney General Eric Holder says it's time now to move to some version of Medicare for all and end this nonsense. That was his reaction to Friday's ruling. Do you agree with him?
We need universal health care, and there are many ways to get there. That is one of them.
You become president, you're sworn in, you have a Democratic House and Senate. The first bill, the first big domestic policy legislation you move is?
Healthcare.
Healthcare. Specifically?
Well, I believe that we need Medicare for all.
I believe that we need to recoup the millions of people that have already lost.
So Medicare for all, first thing out of the box, is in the Castro administration.
Joining us now with reaction, Florida Congressman and House Judiciary Committee member Matt Gaetz, attorney and lawyer, differently CEO Brian Rotella, and RNC national spokeswoman Kayleigh McEnany. You know, Congressman Matt Gaetz, I'm going to ask you this first. Democrats seem to be excited about the opportunity of fighting for Medicare for all. You'd think they'd be depressed about Obamacare possibly being unconstitutional, but they're pivoting and they're right on to the next one. Is that ever possible?
Democrats were happy with Obamacare, but now it seems that they won't be satisfied until they have a complete government takeover of health care. There are Americans watching tonight who've seen their premiums rise. They've seen their deductibles become unaffordable. And at their jobs, they haven't seen the same career opportunities because Obamacare has been a wet blanket over our economy. So now, with this ruling, it's my expectation that our Chief Justice will have a second opportunity to do the right thing and rule Obamacare unconstitutional. You'll remember, Judge, that his basis initially for writing an opinion to uphold the law was that it was a tax. Well, now that we've repealed that tax, the foundation for Obamacare is crumbling, and that means we might be able to actually start on health care worthy of the great people in this country.
You know, Brian Rotella, I want to talk to you about what, since the congressman brought it up, how you think this vote is going to go in the Supreme Court and what you think of the Texas judge's decision overturning Obamacare.
Yeah, Judge Deneen, what I would say is there's another Rocky movie about this. This is a flat-out knockout. I think Sylvester Stallone at his age could come out the way Judge O'Connor, the judge in Texas, wrote this 54-page opinion and could get a 9-0, that's what I'm predicting, next June, which is when I think this is going to go to the Supreme Court, verdict decision upholding what happened in the Texas District Court. And the reason is this, and the congressman alluded to it, Judge O'Connor and the Texas court judge, he laid out line and verse why this baby gets thrown out with the bathwater, and that is the individual mandate. For the audience, that's what was at issue here, is what they were saying. The folks that were challenging this is when you take the tax bill that the president passed with Congress in 2017, that tax bill set the individual mandate to zero. By setting that individual mandate to zero, there is no tax. Justice Roberts said that it was constitutional because it went to the ability to tax.
Right.
If we have no tax, it's not constitutional. The whole bill goes away. What we have to think about is what happens when the Supreme Court upholds this. Where does our healthcare economy go from there?
And, you know, it's all about severability. I mean, you know, once that individual mandate, the tax piece is gone, then the whole thing apparently fails if the judge's thinking is upheld. Kayleigh, I want to talk to you about what we just heard Chuck Schumer talking about. And that was that, you know, the sky is falling. There'll be no money for opioid addiction and fighting that. There'll be no money for women giving birth to children and babies. I mean, it's Chicken Little, run for the hills. How are the Republicans going to gainsay or rebut that kind of message?
By telling the truth, those are scare tactics. Obamacare is staying in place until it is appealed up to likely the Supreme Court through the Fifth Circuit. So Obamacare is staying in place. The onus is on Democrats to come to the table. We've put forward very fair-minded plans. Graham Cassidy was fantastic. If Democrats wanted to have a liberal Medicare for all, aka socialized medicine system, they could have done it. However, it would be at the state level. Meanwhile, the red states would have free market solutions and thriving health care. It was a fair-minded plan, but Democrats are not interested in solutions or affordable health care. That's why we have Obamacare, where the average premium has doubled. The only one who has taken an interest in solving the health care problem is President Trump, who put in place short-term health care plans, market-based solutions that have actually made this the only year we have not seen premiums rise since Obamacare was put in place. That is thanks to President Trump and the little he can do from the executive side.
All right, and Matt Gaetz, finally, you know, the Democrats have refused to work with the president on just about everything. I suspect, and tell me if I'm wrong, that all they're going to do is have this mantra of Medicare for all, and they're not going to work to change anything in the run-up to the 2020.
They've already voted against tort reform. They've voted against buying insurance across state lines, and they voted against block grants that would unlock the innovation at the state level that Kayleigh was just talking about. So I don't know what they're for, but they seem to be against the things that would lower prices for Americans.
Thank you. All right, up next, part 2 of Sean's interview with Ambassador Nikki Haley. Stay with us. Welcome to Hannity. Here now is part 2 of Sean's interview with outgoing U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley. Take a look.
Let me go to Russia here for a second. You know, my good friend Devin Nunes, he actually is very smart, and he wrote in 2014 that the Russians were going to try to impact our elections and create chaos. I don't think anybody disagrees that they have. I believe all of that is true. But I also know that, you know, for decades, we have also been hacked many times within our government. And I am beyond frustrated that we allow that to happen to us. We have the intelligence to stop that. We haven't done it. But my question is about Putin. Of course, he's a hostile actor, a hostile regime. But how do we manage? He's got ICBMs pointed at us. We haven't pointed at him. How do we manage that, knowing what they try to do to us?
I think exactly in the way that the president is communicating with Putin, that needs to continue to go forward. But it's very much like the Saudi Arabia situation. We want a relationship with Russia. It's in our interest to try and have communication and relationship with Russia. They've made that very hard through the poisoning of the Skripals in the UK, through the fact that we had to go and expel the Russian diplomats. There's been all of these different things that we've had to do, and from meddling in the elections. But we have to communicate what we will deal with and what we won't. And once we do that, we develop that relationship. And so there are times we have to be very hard on Russia. But someone asked me the question, is Russia a friend or a foe? My answer was, it depends on the day. And our goal is to hopefully have them be a friend more days than they're a foe. But it's not going to be because we're being soft on them. It's going to be because they want the relationship back, and they are starting to act better in that way.
Obviously, they're a big challenge. Obviously, a nuclear-armed Iran is something the world could not tolerate. It's too dangerous. But my greater long-term fear would be China, and their military buildup has been massive. There's no doubt about it. But on the other hand, I mean, even this past week, we see that China is moving to make trade concessions with the president on automobiles, on soybeans, things that are important to our farmers, our manufacturers. But what's interesting is the relationship that the president has, because every time he's supposed to have a 45-minute meeting, it goes on for 4 or 5 hours. There seems to have been a rapport that has been established, and they even seem to have been helpful as it relates to North Korea. But long term, I don't know what to make of them.
I think that we have to always be cautious of China. But I think what has happened has been so much better is the president and President Xi, they're actually friends. They get along. And for that reason, it hasn't been as hostile as it could be. But at the same time, the president's not going to back down and let China have an advantage. And I appreciate the strength that he's shown. I appreciate how he's continuing to push hard. It's what we need from America. They need to know that they can't steal our intellectual property. They need to know that they can't have unfair trade practices, and they need to know that we're watching them. And I think, you know, whether it's cyber or anything else, China is definitely a country to watch, and it's definitely a country that we have to decide what that relationship's going to look like. But I'll tell you, we're in a good place because at least the president has a communication with President Xi, and he has used it to express good things and bad things.
Yeah, these are very consequential times as it relates to foreign policy issues. I think Mike Pompeo has been a rock star. Yes. I think you have had an incredible run here for yourself, and I only see a lot of progress that we didn't have. We reversed a lot of the perceptions, as you mentioned earlier. So I've known you a long time. What's next for Ambassador Haley?
I think I'm going to take a few days to sleep in, which I'm excited about. I'm going to certainly...
A few days to sleep in. That's it? That's all you want?
You know, I'm always going to have a voice. I'm always going to want to be involved in policy. I'm certainly going to support President Trump's reelection and kind of see where my feet fall. It's been 8 years of public service for me, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. So I look forward to seeing what my options are.
Okay, but now the real question. Have you given thought about running for president? Your name is mentioned quite often.
I have not. And I know a lot of people talk about it, and I appreciate that. But the one thing I've always done is focus on doing my job and doing it well. And I wanted to serve the president and the American people with the best of my ability. I have done that and will do that up until December 31st. But it's not something my husband and I have talked about. It's not anything that we're thinking, just because I think that, you can't think too far in the future. You just have to make the best of today and prove what you're capable of, and then things fall into place after that.
All right, Ambassador, great job on behalf of the country. We appreciate it. Thank you so much, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks so much. Merry Christmas, John.
Merry Christmas.
Coming up, Trace Gallagher with a live report surrounding the former Green Beret who's being charged with murder for killing a suspected Taliban bomb maker. That's next. Don't go away.
We're doing long-form documentaries, and as a vet myself who served in Iraq and Afghanistan, telling the stories of what those guys did in that moment is our job at Fox Nation.
Start your free trial today. Go to foxnation.com and join now.
Welcome back to Hannity. This weekend, President Trump announced he would be reviewing the case of Major Matt Goldstein. Major Goldstein is charged with murdering a suspected Taliban bomb maker. Trace Gallagher joins us live from the West Coast newsroom with the latest. Trace?
Good evening, Judge. President Trump says he will review the case of Major Matt Goldstein, though it is very unclear if the president is considering a pardon. Being commander-in-chief means that any involvement could be considered unlawful command influence and could result in the case being thrown out. Major Matthew Goldstein was once awarded the Silver Star for Valor for his actions in Afghanistan and was under consideration for the Distinguished Service Cross. Then in 2014, when Goldstein was interviewing with the CIA and taking a polygraph, he acknowledged killing an alleged Taliban bomb maker who was suspected of killing 2 Marines. The bomb maker had been detained, but under strict rules of engagement, the Army was forced to release him. Instead of letting him go, Major Goldstein tracked him down and killed him, fearing the bomb maker would later target Afghans who were helping U.S. troops. After Goldstein's admission, the military launched an investigation, but closed it without filing charges. Then he said this in 2016 on Special Report. Watch.
Did you kill the Taliban bomb maker?
Yes.
You willingly offered up these details.
Right.
At the CIA, right?
That's correct.
And that's where it all started.
Pretty much.
Partly because of those public comments, the Army has now reopened the investigation, and President Trump is supporting Goldstein, tweeting, quote, he could face the death penalty from our own government after he admitted to killing a terrorist bomb maker while overseas. The Pentagon calls this a law enforcement matter and says it will respect the integrity of the process.